Hey, what is going on, guys? This is Mike Iacono from Mike's Custom Airbrush and Iacono Studios. We're here in the retail store, and today I am going to do a video of an unboxing of the airbrush that I use. I get a lot of questions on in here in the store every weekend on how do I get started with airbrushing and what tools can I use, and there's so many honestly different answers for that because it depends on what you're using the airbrush for. But I felt like let's do a beginner video, break it down. This is a good universal airbrush no matter what you're painting for. So I think I can give you guys some good content and help you get started with the basics. So we're gonna jump right in. Without further ado, unboxing the Iwata HP-BCS. All right, here we go. Okay guys, so here's the Iwata HP-BCS Eclipse. I think this is a great starting airbrush. It's also a great airbrush for professionals. I've been using this airbrush for years now. So I'm going to take you through and show you the basics. So for all you beginners out there who are looking to get started, I'm going to break this airbrush down, show you the components, show you the basics of how it works, and we're going to go from there. So yeah, let's just dive right in. So it comes in this is actually, you can buy the airbrush single or you can buy the kit. The kit comes with the airbrush, the hose, a few paints, some cleaner, and a bottle. So pretty reasonable pricing. It goes anywhere from about $120 to about $140. You can get this airbrush through Coast Airbrush out of California. I buy all my stuff through them. If you're, you have a local Hobby Lobby, I believe they carry a small airbrush section. You might be able to purchase that there. But definitely Coast Airbrush. You can look this airbrush up and definitely check out some more stuff that they have on the site as far as accessories. So, all right, let's dive right in. So, let's see here. It's got this outside package, and I'm gonna open it up. So, okay, so as soon as you open the box, you see you have the bottle, you have the airbrush. It comes with a little wrench here. So we're gonna take this bottle out. Basic plastic bottle, which is great. You could use that for anything. We have the basic airbrush. We're gonna sit right here, and we have the cap here. I don't know why that's off, but okay. So we have the airbrush, and then if you pull this up and go underneath, because this is the kit, you're gonna have your airbrush hose. It comes. This is new, actually. I've been buying these airbrushes for a while. They're giving you a quick connect now. That usually you got to buy these separate, and they're not cheap. They're about 20 bucks, so that's actually a pretty good deal. I don't use these quick connects because I use different bottles, but this is a cool tool, so that's pretty cool. And it gives you some basic illustration paints you can fart around with. I don't use those. Some airbrush cleaner. Basically, this is pretty much Windex and water. I really don't use this much, but just showing you everything it comes with. And it has some lube in here for your needle. So it's once in a while, when you're cleaning your airbrush out, once in a while you can put a little bit of lube in here, make it flow smoothly. We'll talk about that maybe. And then I guess you got your basic literature. So we put these boxes aside. So, okay, so you have the basic airbrush, you got a few paints, a bottle, the hose. So yeah, let's get started. I'm going to put some of this stuff aside because we're not going to talk about these few things right off the bat, and then we're going to talk about let's just talk about the hose real quick. So it comes with the airbrush hose. It's basically a 1/4 inch fitting, which is pretty standard to most manifolds, or if you're building things yourself. You can click this right to your compressor too, because that's 1/4 inch. So it comes with that, and I believe this is a 10-foot hose, and this is made for Iwata. So basically you're just connecting the hose right to your airbrush like that, and then the other end's going to go to your long hose that leads to your compressor or whatever your air source is. Okay, so that's the braided hose, which is pretty cool. All right, and then your bottle. So this is just basic plastic bottle. I believe these are solvent proof, so whether you're using acrylic paint or automotive paint, this holds everything. Same thing, comes with a little cap there. I don't use these bottles that it comes with. They're great. I pretty much use these bottles. These are the old school Pache VL3 bottles. I like these because they stand, they won't top over like these. Don't get me wrong. You usually have your airbrush connected to them. This is a personal preference thing, so I don't want to spend too much time on this, but the reason I like using these bottles is because I have a little bit bigger hands and I feel like there's more I can hold on to. But it is cool that Iwata definitely gets you started with some bottles. So they're great for paint, anything cleaner, whatever you want to put on there. So comes with that. The small wrench it gives you. This is basically for the front of your airbrush. If you want to get in there, you can basically take that little wrench without nicking everything up with pliers and give it a good snug, and then you can take this apart when it comes cleaning. So that's what this little wrench is for, so you'll want to hang on to that. It's got the little Iwata logo on there. So let's dive right in. Let's talk about this airbrush. So this is a double action airbrush. What that means is there's single action airbrushes and double action. Single action basically means when you press down on this trigger, you're going to get air and paint at the same time. And you would control your spray pattern, the width of the amount of paint that comes out, through the back of your airbrush. You would turn it. That's with a single action. They're great for like painting things solid colors, hobbyists. They're definitely not great for, taking your work further with like drawing and painting and intricate stuff. A lot of things you see that's associated with airbrushing, because you can't control your line with your trigger. You're controlling your width of spray back here. So single action airbrushes, press down for paint and air at the same time, and you're going to get that to come out right away. This is what they call a double action airbrush. So I can press down on this trigger all day and get air without any material coming out of my tip. And then as I pull back on that trigger is when I'm going to get volume of paint. So it's allowing you to control this airbrush a lot more while you're painting, and control the amount of material that's coming out of the airbrush along with your line thickness. So we're pressing down on this and then we're pulling back. So therefore there's two steps. They're going to call it a double action airbrush. This is the main tool of trade for professional airbrush guys because like I said, you have all that control in your hand as you're painting. Good airbrushes and bad airbrushes. I'm talking about the Iwata because this is a company that's been around for years and I've been using this airbrush. But I'm gonna be honest, I don't really feel that there's good or bad airbrushes. I've used most airbrushes. Double action airbrushes, forget about Pache, Iwata, Thayer and Chandler, there's a few others, but the point is I can take any double action airbrush and do the same quality of work, bar none. Granted, some are going to be more comfortable in my hand than others. Some are going to have a little pros and cons than others. But I want to be upfront. There is no bad airbrush to get started with. So I'm going to talk about this airbrush because I feel like this is an amazing airbrush. It's a good quality airbrush, whether you're a beginner or a mediocre airbrush artist or professional. You can use this for drawing, painting, automotive work, sign. I don't care what you're painting. You can use this airbrush. Now there are other airbrushes that will make more sense for you to buy depending on what you're airbrushing on. So like, for instance, if you're getting into nail painting, you're a nail artist, you're not going to want an airbrush of this with a bottom feed that carries all that paint. It doesn't make sense. And you'll see the same type of airbrush with a little cup on top. So that'll be perfect when you want to take a little bit of paint, put it in there, squirt a little bit, clean it out, and go to the next thing. So for instance, as an example, when I use nail artists, Iwata's a great brand, but they'll make a few different models for you to choose depending on what you're painting on. Me, I'm doing a lot of t-shirt art and other things like that, so I'm going to want a big volume of paint because I'm blasting through a lot of paint and I'm going forward. Therefore, this bottom feed works well with me. So you can buy an Iwata brand and find something that suits you depending on what you're doing. Hey, I'm just doing a little bit of automotive work. I'm doing nail art. I'm just using this for shadows and highlights. Or, hey, this is going to be my workhorse, kind of like it is for me. So not to touch too much on that, but Iwata's an amazing brand. You can't go wrong with looking up this brand and finding what model works for you. But again, to get started, basics, this is an amazing airbrush for no matter what you're using it for. So the Iwata Eclipse HP-BCS double action airbrush is amazing. So let's start breaking this down real quick and show you what the components are. So this is your main airbrush. Basically you're going to have a few parts. So we're going to tell you how to take this apart for troubleshooting and just so you know what to expect when you get this airbrush. So basically you have a back handle on here, and basically all that's doing when you unscrew this is it's protecting this needle from getting jammed, because I'll show you the components, but basically this needle is what is going back and forth when you pull this trigger, and that's controlling the amount of paint coming on here. So basically the only thing this handle is doing is protecting that from being back there. So a lot of times, like me, I don't keep these handles on there because I want access to this more frequently, especially with working with acrylics paints. They're very thick, so I might have to get in here a little bit. I don't want to keep undoing that and putting it back on. When I'm using automotive paints, they're very thin like water. I can actually keep this on there, and I'm very rarely going to have a clog because those paints are like water, so I can get away with that. But when shooting t-shirt paint, acrylic paint, Createx, Wicked, all that, I don't keep my backs on here because I'm going into this needle and pulling back on it a little bit, and I'll get into that a little bit further. So so yeah, the handle's on there to protect that needle. We're gonna take that off, okay? So we're gonna unscrew this back. I'm gonna take everything apart here. I'm gonna pull this needle out. That loosens it, okay? And I'm just gonna break this airbrush down all at once so we can look at all the components. There's a little piece here that unscrews, which holds in this spring, which is your tension. We're going to take the trigger out, and now we're going to move to the front. There's a small nozzle that goes on the front. I actually don't keep those on when I'm painting, but we're going to talk about that too. And now I'm going to remove the second part of this nozzle, which exposes this little cone here. And that's actually what the needle's going to go in and out of. I'll try to focus on that again when we break that apart. Okay, so, and then that cone just kind of fell out. Okay, so this is every part of this airbrush that you see. And you might go, wow, this is a little technical, like, what's going on here? What the hell? No big deal, because once you start doing this and you're getting in there airbrushing, after the first month, you're gonna know how to break this down. So very rarely do I take this all apart. The only time I do is if I get paint that backs up all in here and clogs everything, and then you're like, okay, I gotta clean all this out of here. Other than that, if you're taking care of your airbrush, you really don't need to break it down this much. But for learning sakes, I want to show you everything. So okay, so we're going to start with the body. This is the body. There's nothing going on attached to this now. It's just pretty much the cylinder. And then we're going to show you how we put this back together, okay? So let me tell you how this airbrush works. So here's your small cone, okay? And there's a small hole in the front. And then this needle basically is inserted in there, and it kind of fills the end of this hole and clogs it up. So what happens was, when you're pulling back on that trigger, the needle pulls back, and the more it pulls back, the more it allows space to have paint come out of that. So if I'm pulling back a lot, it's going to pull back on that needle and leave this hole more exposed for material to go through. When I'm pulling back a little bit, you're barely going to get a little bit of paint. But these are the two main components that really dictate the amount of paint that's going to come out of here. And these are the two main components that you're going to replace in this airbrush from time to time. This needle, if this gets bent on the end or anything, you're going to notice that in your spray pattern. So they sell these needles you can replace. There's also a way to kind of file that a little bit, but basically that's what it is. It's sharp as a tack, and it's going in and out of this cone back and forth smoothly. And same thing with this circle here. If there's any dents or anything in this circle, it's going to affect your paint flow. So these are the two main things that I replace probably once every 2 months. Again, I take care of my stuff. I know what to watch out for. If you're a beginner, you might obviously have some mistakes, snag the needle, this or that. So these can be replaced. And again, you can go on Coast Airbrush and find these parts. They're all available for the airbrush, but the cone and the needle is what you'll replace most commonly. Everything else here, they make replacement parts if you lose anything, but these things aren't really gonna take a beating, pretty much. You know, maybe after 2 years of working it like crazy, you might say, hey, this is feeling some grinding, but pretty much not, man. Your needle and your cones is everything. So so that's what I want to talk about there. Okay, so we'll put those aside for a second, and then we'll talk about the trigger. So the trigger is what's going to be inserted in there, and inserted in the bottom there. You'll see a little space down there where your trigger goes in. You'll see that. You'll wiggle that in there, and you can go up and down. You'll hear the air coming out. Okay. The spring is what goes inside, and basically there's a tension in there. So if you're pulling back on that trigger and you notice after using it for 20 minutes, like, wow, I'm getting a little tired there, it's because the tension's really up high. You can loosen that to make it a little bit more easier to pull back. So you'll find what's comfortable for you. Again, that's something where once you have it for a while, you'll say, hey, I'm more comfortable this way or that way. But basically that's what helps with that spring. You know, that spring goes in there, and as you tighten this, that'll make your tension back and forth. So that's what that's for. Your needle sliding through this guide here. Again, these are all just things that are holding the needle in there. And then we'll talk about the front. So I'll start putting this back together one piece by one piece to show you how I do this. So let's just say you have everything apart. And let's say you had to take it apart because you had to clean it. So, you know, basically I'll hold this up to the light so I can kind of look through it like you're looking through a telescope, and then you'll be able to see inside that tunnel. Can't really see it in here with the camera, but if you shine a light, like hold this up to a fluorescent light or whatever, you'll look through there. Then you'll see a clear tube. You'll really be able to see any paint stuck in there, if there's anything stuck in there. And basically what I'll do is I'll get my needle and I'll turn it backwards, and I'll kind of just put it in there and try to like pretty much plunge that out. If there's anything stuck in there, and I'll use the needle a lot, but what they do is they make these little plunger, again through Coast Airbrush, they make these little different size cleaning utensils. So if you do have a piece of paint that's being stubborn, you can take this in there, go in there, you know, twist it around and loosen that paint up pretty good and clean that out, you know. So that's what's great about busting everything apart if you have to, if you're having troubleshooting with your airbrush, and it's not something, we'll go over that because most of the time it's paint in this cone, but if you notice it's not that, you did all that, you got paint stuck in here. So you can use your needle, whatever, clean it all out. Once you see that's cleaned out, then you can start assembling everything, and then I'll show you how that goes. So we'll start with the cone, okay? You're basically gonna place that right inside there. It just sits in there. You're gonna take your next piece right here, which holds the cone in there. You're gonna be very delicate, and you're gonna put that on top, and that screws, whoop. That screws right on top. And pretty much you'll just hand tighten that. There'll be a little rubber washer there that helps. You'll tighten that, and you'll still see the cone, okay? Next you have a piece that goes on there, and that'll cover and protect that cone for the most part. You'll screw that on there, and same thing, hand tight. Okay, I'm gonna leave this end cap off for the time being, but basically what that end cap does is you can put that on there, and now that kind of protects your needle while you're painting. I don't like that because I can't see when I get really close. Again, I've been in the game for a while, so I can get used to painting with my needle off, but you can actually paint without using this. And what happens is you'll see your needle exposed, and I'll show you that when I put it together. But for the sake of argument, we're just gonna put everything back to the way it came. So then you'll put that end cap back on, and there's your front. That's ready to go. Now we're gonna turn, and the next part is your trigger, okay? It's hard to see on camera, but there's a little indentation on the trigger on the underside, and that'll go towards the back. So when you know, like, hey, which way do I put this? There is a front or back, and you'll see a flat part on this trigger for the Iwata. It's really hard to see, but you know, you'll see the underside, there's a little flat part. So that goes towards the back, and you see the end kind of wiggles there. So you kind of gotta try to hold it in there and get it in there a little bit. And then once you'll see it, it goes right in, and it'll go up and down, and you'll feel that little spring in there. So that's in there, okay? Your next part, you'll pull this little puppy out, you'll see this little lip, and that basically slides right in there and goes right up under there. You'll see how I did that? It goes right in and slides right between that. Okay, and you just leave that sit there like that. You'll take your spring, you'll put your spring over that. You'll take your next part, which holds the spring in there, and this is the part, like I said, you can adjust for tension, and then you'll screw that in. Okay, so now there's tension on that spring, and that's gonna hold this in there, so now I can pull it back, and you see how it kind of snaps back? That's because the spring's on there. Now I could tighten this all the way up, like I said, and now it's harder for me to pull back on here, okay? As I loosen it, it becomes a little bit easier to pull back, and you'll find what's good for you as you're painting. But that's how that all stays in there. You have your tension, you're ready to go. Your next part is your needle. Now here's the part where you want to be delicate. Now let's go back to the front real quick. I'm going to take this end cap off, that one little end cap, just so I can expose where this needle is going to go through. So you're going to be careful. You're going to put it, insert it in, and you're going to be real careful. Now as I push it in, I want you to focus on the tip, and you'll notice, boom, it just came out right there. I'll pull it in, and then I'll pull it out. So you'll see my needle's exposed there. Okay? So now we'll come back to the back, and here's my last part, and that's basically gonna hold the needle in place. You push it in, turn it, and that locks your needle in place. So now, when I pull back on this trigger, the needle's gonna move too. So if we go to the front, I'm going to pull back on that needle, and it disappears. And that's what's happening. That needle pulls back and allows paint to go through. Okay? So this is the cap that protects that needle. So as you're painting and you're going across, if this cap's not on and you hit that needle, you're going to get a dent in it. Obviously, somebody who's been in the game for all these years, like myself, I don't have that issue. But if you're a beginner, you're gonna snag this needle like crazy if you use it exposed. So I would definitely suggest keeping this on there, because then you can practice your spraying, do your thing, and you can hit this all day long against your surface, and your needle's gonna be protected. As you get used to that, as months goes by, then feel free to take it off, and we can go from there. If you pan over here to my quick airbrush setup, you'll see my t-shirt setup. All my airbrushes, none of them have them on there, nor do they have the backs on there, because, you know, I'm careful and I know what I'm doing. So even when I'm painting fast, I can pick up paint fast. I'm making sure I don't touch these needles or the backs of them. If you did punch the backs of this, if you drop your airbrush, what's going to happen is that needle's going to punch right through that cone we talked about earlier, put a split in there, and now you need a new cone. So again, they're the two most delicate parts, but I do keep them exposed, just so you guys can see my basic airbrush setup there. So yeah, so again, I definitely recommend as a beginner keeping this on, and then I definitely recommend keeping this back on, and this is your complete airbrush, and then you're ready to spray, okay? Let's talk about troubleshooting real quick. So the most common problem beginners have is, they ask me all the time through, you know, Mike, why is the paint not coming out? I'll tell you right now, 90% of the issue is this. You do not have enough air pressure pushing that paint out compared to the thickness of paint. That is 90% of the problem. In other words, the viscosity of paint. If your paint's like water, it's gonna be real easy to move, okay? If it's like a milkshake, for the analogy, very thick, it's gonna be harder to move. So when I'm using acrylic paints like Createx or Wicked or anything thick, my air pressure is turned up to 50, 60, 70 pounds to be able to push that heavy paint through there. When I'm using more of a very thin paint, like let's say a urethane House of Color, which is like water, I'm not shooting 50 pounds of pressure. There's no need to. My pressure is probably 15 pounds, 20 pounds, because I know it's not thick paint. It's gonna be able to move that paint easily through there. I'm not gonna get clogs, okay? So quick tip on that, check your air pressure when using those thick paints. A lot of times that's usually your issue. You're not putting enough air pressure to push out that paint. Let's just say that is not your problem, and Bottom line is, when you're using thick paints, you get a little bit of a piece of, I don't know, rubbery paint or a blemish or piece of dirt that goes through there. And what happens is that cone I was showing you, let's take this apart again real quick, just so I can show you this real quick. So what happens is, if you have a piece of paint that's stuck in here and this needle's trying to go in there, and it can't because it's clogging it. It's just something that's just not letting that needle come in. And you're gonna feel that in the trigger, like, oh, it feels sticky or whatever. So most other times, everything's gonna be stuck in this cone and it just can't get through that little pipe. So basically what I'll do is I'll undo that top just like I did here. Actually, yeah. I'll take this cone out and I'll take my needle and I'll try to go in there and slowly go in and out, and then a lot of times you'll see that little piece of dry paint pop out, and then you'll feel it being free. Because as you go in there and you're feeling it, because again, you have to get your feet wet, and this is a feel thing. You'll feel there's something in there, rubbery, like spongy. So you know it's in the cone. That's where your problem is. So you'll try to peel that out, you'll try to push that through, but again, this is very delicate, so you'll try to push it through, and most of the time you'll get that out, and then you're free to put that right back in. Take your time. Yeah, first time I tried to do that, it popped off too, but. And you'll screw that back in. You'll take your time, put your needle through, and then after you clean it, you'll notice that needle comes out there perfectly. You could tighten it up, put your airbrush back together, you're ready to go. But troubleshooting, 90% of the problem, I'm telling you, is going to wind up being in that cone, and especially when you're using thick paints. When you're using thick paints, t-shirt paint, acrylic paint, I might do this a few times a day with one of my airbrushes because, you know, especially fluorescents, because it just happens. Don't get me wrong, I strain my paint before I put in the bottle and all that, but it's thick paint. I do not have that issue with House of Color paint when I'm shooting on motorcycle art, you know, automotive art, helmets. All that paint is like super watery, and therefore there's less chance of getting, you know, things in your paint and clogging. So, you know, I could paint all day with that and not have one interruption. But t-shirt paint and acrylic paint, you definitely will have troubleshooting, and that's part of it. That doesn't go away. So quick tip, check your air pressure. If you have thick paint, you want to shoot it between 50, 60, 70 pounds for, you know, any kind of acrylic water-based paint. If you're really watering that paint down, even if it's acrylic, then you can lower your air pressure. So keep that in mind. Second is, if you do have a clog, 9 times out of 10, it's definitely inside that cone, and you can unscrew this, take your cone out. Literally, you can look through that cone, hold it up to a light, and you'll see it's clogged. And you can try to just delicately, because you don't want to hurt that cone, put a split in it. You want to slowly work that little bit of a booger out, or whatever the heck's in there, rubbery paint, to unclog that, and then you could put that back together, and then you're ready to go again. So that's the basics for this airbrush. I do have my air on, so I'm gonna pick up one of my other airbrushes and just show you a quick spray, and show you what you should expect from that airbrush coming out. But yeah, if for everybody beginning, you want to ask me about equipment, this is my main tool of trade. This has been the tool that I've been using for the last 30 going on 31 years that I made a name for myself using an airbrush. It's definitely an extension of your art. A lot of people, when they want to get into airbrushing, you know, it's a broad question. A lot of people, what they mean is, I want to learn how to draw and use an airbrush. It's not the same thing. Learning how to draw and paint and learning how to control an airbrush is two different things. You need to be an artist and learn how to draw. This is just an extension of your art, just like a fan brush, just like a marker, just like pencils. That's what this is. It's just one of the most advanced tools, in my opinion, for an artist to be able to use and control. And I believe that's why you don't see a lot of airbrush artists. You'll see a lot of people go into tattooing artists, because that tool, you're still able to lean on something and control. You're not leaning on anything with an airbrush, and I believe that's why you don't see a lot of airbrush guys. I believe there's a million amazing artists out there, and I can't tell you how many people that are amazing artists and they come in and say, man, I tried the airbrush, but I just couldn't do it. And that's not true. You just didn't really take the time to learn how to master the tool, controlling the tool. Then you would blend it with your airbrush. I mean, then you blend it with your art skills. But it took me about 1.5 years to learn how to master controlling this tool, and I was a great artist. But my airbrush work wasn't up to par compared to my other art because I just didn't know how to control this tool. So you got to put your time in, man, and don't give up after a month or two, because especially if you're even a beginning artist, because if you're a beginning artist, not only are you learning how to draw and paint, but you're also trying to learn how to control a tool. And I tell this analogy to everybody. I go, if you're a beginner artist and you're trying to learn how to airbrush at the same time, that's like wanting to learn how to play guitar and starting with Jimi Hendrix. Like, you can do that, but you're going to get off to a slow start. But again, there's many reasons why people want to use this airbrush. You might want to use it just to, hey, listen, you might be an avid fisherman and you want to learn how to paint your own lures, and that just involves a couple colors. You're not trying to draw, you're just trying to learn how to use it for fades. Great way to use it. The next guy wants to be able to, do everything maybe like I'm doing. Full-blown artwork, painting on all types of things, creating your own art, which is taking it to the next level. You might be a nail artist, so you want to use little stencils, and after doing nails for all these years, you want to take your art to the next level and do airbrush work on nails. So there's so many different uses for an airbrush, but I don't want to blab too much, but this airbrush has been a go-to for me in my art for so many years, and I do a lot of other artwork that don't involve this airbrush. But beginners ask me all the time, Mike, what is the equipment you use? How do I get started? And I believe the Iwata Eclipse HP-BCS double action gun you cannot go wrong with this kit. 120, 130 bucks, available at Coast Airbrush. It's a great beginner airbrush. I'm going to be putting up a lot more videos, and all the videos that you're going to see me do, you're going to see me using this equipment. And maybe what I'll do in the next video is I'll go into materials as far as paint and other things like that, compressors. But I want to get started with the main tool that's in your hand, and that is the airbrush. So yeah, so if you guys have any questions, feel free to hit up my comments. Definitely hit me up and ask me about any other future videos that you might want to see. I'm just getting started with obviously putting these videos together through Iwata Studios. But these are questions I've been answering for 30 years of people coming in my retail store, every week. I don't care if it's a young kid coming in asking to get started or an older guy who's retired, parents asking about their kids. So I'm definitely going to put a lot more videos together, but this is what I use, guys. Airbrush, Iwata Eclipse, HP-BCS, my main tool of the trade. Here's a little bit of artwork behind me. This is all mixed media stuff, but in some way or another, I used an airbrush in here. You know what I mean? This is some new digital art we did, but I picked this up and I used an airbrush for some fades and highlights. Here's a landscape I painted, which is a lot of brush work, but I still came in with some light and used the airbrush. So even if you're not using this for your main tool of trade, this is definitely something you want to put on your arsenal as an artist if you weren't into airbrushing, and as a beginner, definitely a great tool to get started with. So thank you guys. I hope this was a little bit, hope this brought you some value, and I definitely want to break the ice and get started. Check this airbrush out. Check out Coast Airbrush too. They're amazing as far as everything you can get there equipment wise. And in the meantime, check us out, iwakonastudios.shop. You can purchase a lot of our artwork on there. If you have any questions, feel free to leave it in the comments. Iwata Studios on Instagram, Facebook. Also check out Mike's Custom Airbrush on Facebook. And yeah, hit us up with some questions and comments, and we'll be glad to take care of you. And then until then, guys, thank you, man.